Hello, my dear readers. I have had my fangs freshly fitted. I think I'm talking a little bit better than I was in my Dracula video a couple years ago. And if you know about my fangs, you know it's time to talk about some vampire things. I love vampires. Feeling a little weird because I haven't had practice talking in these teeth. Hopefully you can understand me relatively well. But today I would like to talk about my vamp collection. Clearly have a thing for vampires. I don't know how it got started, but here we are. This tooth is a little bit loose, but hopefully it stays in. They're better fitted than they were before. There are a couple books that I don't have on hand because they're borrowed or they're on my Kindle, but let's go ahead and get started with these. It is the spooky season. It is time to talk about vampires. So first, at the top of this stack of books that I had prepared, because I'm going to try and make a TikTok at some point, I have Fangs. This was gifted to me last Christmas by Hillary from not What Victoria Read. Victoria is from What Victoria Read. Hillary from Melted Books. She's one of my best friends here on BookTube. This is a graphic novel, and it is about a romance between a vampire and a werewolf. It's short, it's sweet, it's cute. It's not really a story so much as episodes from their dating life, but absolutely adore this. By the way, I'm not going to be mentioning Twilight in this video for a couple of reasons, but I'm just not. I read the books in high school. I have no desire to reread them because I know I would hate them as an adult. That's all I had to say. I have Salem's Lot from Stephen King. I honestly didn't love this in my first read through. I thought it was too similar to Dracula. Now I have a much better understanding that it's supposed to be a Dracula retelling, so I would like to retry it at some point. I might actually pick it up here soon. I haven't decided when I'm going to reread it. But Salem's Lot is kind of this town being haunted by a vampire or a group of vampires. So it's kind of a classic in the genre at this point. Then I have Octavia Butler. Fledgling is not talked about on BookTube like at all. It's the one book of hers that I never hear anyone talk about. But Fledgling is by the classic sci-fi author Octavia E. Butler, and this is about, I don't remember what they're called. It's kind of like a coven of witches, except that they're vampires, and males and females have to stay apart because of the way their mating rituals work. It's just really hard for them to be around each other. It is kind of sensitive content because our main character looks like a very young, like preteen girl. She has relationships with adults, but she is actually in her 50s, so she's technically it's not pedophilia, but it still feels weird reading it, so just be aware of that. But she wakes up and doesn't remember anything about her past or anything about vampires, and she's trying to learn what happened to her family, what happened to her, and why she has traumatic amnesia. I think it's a very solid book. I think it's a good place to start with Octavia Butler. Of course, I'm only just now reading my second Octavia Butler, so who am I to say where a good place is to start? Next, we have a classic, and this is actually older than Dracula. This is by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. This is Carmilla. And there's a couple interesting things about this book. First off, when you think classic vampire, you think Dracula. It's from like late 1800s, a couple years before blood types were invented. Fun fact, if you didn't know that already, which you probably did because you're watching my video. And if you have watched any of my videos, you know the fun fact about Dracula being published just a couple years before blood types were discovered. But regardless, we'll talk about Dracula in a minute. This is Carmilla. It was written, like I said earlier in the 1800s. This book doesn't have the original publication date, but this is actually I would classify it as a queer vampire book. It's not like it's not like obviously queer. It's more like in the subtle ways that classics can be queer, where they're like, this is essentially a lesbian vampire book, but we're not really going to say that because of the time that it was written. I don't remember much about it. It is short. It's a novella, so if you want something short to pick up that's about vampires, go ahead and try it. It's pretty well written. It's got some nice, it's got a couple of like little illustrations and stuff. But it's just this character who's like drawn to this girl who ends up being a vampire and kind of like trying to figure out who everybody is. So there is that. And then I'm going to go ahead and skip through this pile to the obvious thing that we're here to talk about. If you want to hear more about Dracula, I do have a video all about Dracula where I'm a little less clear talking in my fangs, but I have actually shortened up my collection a bit. I used to have 6 copies of Dracula, and now I only have 4. So I have 2 copies from Barnes & Noble because for some reason the Barnes & Noble Classics collection has 2 copies of it. One is red with a cross and one is blue with a castle. I liked both of them. I didn't know which one I liked better. Yes, I bought both of them at the same time. Don't come for me. I have another Barnes & Noble version. This is the leather bound because I love it. And of course I have the leather bound because why wouldn't I? And then my 4th copy, I think it's really cool. It's like this B-movie cover and it's actually kind of like, let me show you. I'll show you the spine on the Radleys. These are facing different direction. I should cover up my face in the camera so you can read these. The spines are facing different directions. I don't think I covered up my face very well. Whatever. Which screws me up a little bit because like you try to lay them down next to each other. And for example, the publisher's mark is on different sides on the spines. So it's just a little weird to see it on my shelf because I'm thinking it's facing the wrong way, but it's not. This is in Spanish, so I don't really understand it. But I think it would be interesting to read this alongside another Dracula book and kind of translate it on my own. But when I picked up this book in Mexico at the beginning of last year, I did actually start to read the first chapter and I kind of understood what was going on because I've read so much of the book and I remember the first chapter. So that was really interesting. This is one of the reasons I want to learn Spanish. I have never actually dedicated myself to learning Spanish, but I should because I think it would be interesting to read Dracula. I at least want to have my mother-in-law read through parts of it and tell me if it's an old style Spanish or if it's a modern Spanish because I don't know. And I think it would be interesting to find out. It's pretty much pronounced the same way. I believe my husband says Dracula instead of Dracula because it does have that little accent mark above the A, but I love this edition. I think it's fun. I like that it's got the B-movie cover. Next up, we have The Radleys. This was gifted to me for my birthday this year from one of my very good friends. I enjoy this book. Matt Haig is a pretty well-loved author here on BookTube. I don't hear The Radleys talked about a ton. It is a young adult book. I actually really enjoyed it. I didn't feel like it was dumbed down is the wrong term, but it didn't have that same feel as many other young adults that I read where it was made specifically for a young adult audience. It's more this is a young adult story without necessarily having that writing style, but regardless, I love it. We have a vampire family where these 2 vampires have vampire children and tooth popped. And the vampire children don't know that they're vampires because the parents have worked very hard to try and hide it from them. They're not ready to have that discussion yet. And one day, trigger warning for some attempted sexual assault. Our main girl character, someone does try to sexually assault her and they fail because she kills him and drinks his blood. And that's the beginning of the book and these children's discovery of, oh, we're vampires. Okay, what do we do with that? And this was just such a fun ride. I highly recommend if you're just starting out with vampire books or if you like young adult books and want to read more about vampires. That's a good one. This is kind of an inner joke for me. I started reading this during the March that we went into quarantine on getting back from Mexico at the very beginning of COVID, and I haven't really touched it since then, but this is 100 Vicious Little Vampire Stories. I am still sitting at like a third of the way through the book. I do actually want to pick this up and read it again, or read more of the stories in it. I think that's one of my things with short stories. I've come to enjoy short stories more. I know what I like in short stories. But when you read a short story, it's you finish it and it's like, oh, I'm done. A collection of short stories is just harder for me to get through because I keep thinking I'm done with it when I'm not because there's more stories to follow, if that makes sense. And there's 100 of them in here, but they're all very different kinds of vampires. For example, there is a vampire rosebush in one of these stories. Another one has a girl who sucks the ink out of books, and that is her way of being a vampire. So I love in all of these, I love the diversity of what it means to be a vampire, what makes a vampire, the different kinds of vampire stories. I don't love vampire movies generally. It's the movie industry, the filmmaking industry. So they're very, very sexualized. And books don't, not that books don't always do that. Like, obviously you've got all those romances and stuff that do it. But the kind of vampire books that I read don't over-sexualize them so much. It's more, what is a vampire? What makes a vampire? What are vampires like? Some of them are ghoulish. Some of them are family-oriented. Some of them are sparkly. Some of them are classic. I love the different ways that there are of being a vampire. Next up, The Vampire Tapestry. This is the one vampire book I own that I have not yet read. This is a more recent book that I got from Second Sale. By the way, if you would like 10% off $10 or more on used books, you can use my code FEM10. I'll have that down in the description. I want to read this at some point soon, but I remember looking it up after I got it because it was on my Amazon list, but I didn't remember what all it was about. And I was hearing some things about how it was very just racially insensitive, and reading some of the beginning of it, I was like, and so I put it down for a little bit. I'll just read you some of the back of it. Dr. Edward Wayland is nothing like your average vampire. Not only is he a respected anthropology professor, but his bloodlust stems from a biological rather than supernatural source. The only member of a species of one, he has learned to form an uneasy sympathy with his prey in order to survive, secretly thieving blood from his victims rather than murdering them outright. But even age-honed discretion can fail in the face of desperation. That's essentially The Vampire Tapestry. I don't know too much about what it's about, but it's going to be the next vampire book that I read. Two other books that I have to talk about. One that I own, I don't have it on me at the moment because my friend is borrowing it. That is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. I read this when it was released last summer. It is one of my favorite Grady Hendrix books. I did struggle with it a little bit. Kind of a content warning. It's very heavy on gaslighting. Like, oh, that didn't really happen to you. This isn't a real thing. It was really heavy on that, and that made it a difficult read for sure. And the blood sucking is very sexualized in this. It's very much compared to rape, which I think was kind of a good thing to include as far as telling a story and kind of the messages the book was trying to get across, but it was definitely one of Hendrix's more difficult books for me to get through, while I still really enjoyed it. This is a period book. I think it takes place during, like the 60s or the 80s or something. Very much during that like perfect family time, but you have this group that gets together and one of them thinks that her new neighbor is a vampire, and a bunch of creepy and weird stuff happens because it's Grady Hendrix, and I love this book. Just talking about it, I kind of want to reread it. I thought I only had one book left. Turns out I have two because I forgot about one of them that I had on my Kindle. So first I'm going to mention Blood and Vinyl. This is written by Ignacio R. Limon. I think that's how you say the name. I am friends with them on Twitter. They are a very, very nice person. And they talked about, I don't remember if it was a reaction to one of my vampire videos or my Dracula video, but they talked about how they wrote a book called Blood and Vinyl. I love the cover. Oh, it's just this vinyl record with teeth. It's awesome. This is not actually a book that I finished. It's a book that I would like to finish at some point. This is an LGBTQ vampire book, which honestly, considering how vampires work in mythology, I'm surprised that I haven't come across more of them. Like, vampires are weirdly heterosexual in a lot of literature, but maybe it's just the literature that I'm reading. At the time that I read this book, I was really confused by the characters. Like, there's just a lot going on and not necessarily a lot of explanation, but I would like to give it another try. I will read you a quick synopsis from Google Books. It says, "What's in it? Queer stuff, trans main character, eldritch things, vampires, Latinx influences, witches, punks, early aughts, and adulty bits." Synopsis. MJ is desperately trying to bring her best friend Ash back, while Lael, a born vampire with no past or memory to speak of, struggles to find his place in Portland. Valeria bounces and leaves her children, Verena and Eric, to her elder brother Sasha, much to the twins' dismay. Kalian is attempting to hold on to his power without dropping a damn house on someone. And that's kind of what it says for the synopsis. In that particular synopsis, it doesn't really mention a storyline, but you can see even in that, there's like a lot of characters going on. I do want to try it again. I really like the person who wrote it. So there's that. Check it out. Last book that I want to mention, it's actually getting a sequel coming out, I think next year, and that is Roller Derby Vampire Girls. This is one, I think I read it earlier this year, and it's just fun. I mean, it's a pretty typical vampire setup. They're kind of vicious, they drink blood, but this person, our main character, learns that vampires exist, and there is actually a whole roller derby team of vampires, and she basically has to do a derby tournament to fight for the life of herself and her friends. And actually, if you go ahead and follow the author on Instagram, he does a lot of giveaways for the book as well as some other treats. He actually works with this company that makes steaks, and he gives away a steak with the book, so that's kind of cool. So if you want to feel like Buffy the Vampire Slayer for Halloween, or just generally protect yourself, there is a company that makes vampire steaks. That is going to be it for me. My throat is kind of killing me right now. I don't know if it's the dry winter air coming in or what. I need a break before I do some more filming today. So, please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media. I don't know why I said it like that. I think I was trying to do a vampire accent. I suck at accents. Anyways, please comment down below if you have some vampire books that you think I should check out. I will see all of you in my next video, unless I kill you first. Bye, friends.